Let's give it up, Anders.
Thank you, Mike. Can everybody hear me? I hope you can understand me too. English is not my mother tongue, but if I understand it right, Minnesota is the place to be if you're from Sweden or Norway or something like that. So, but if you don't understand anything or something I say, just raise your hand. It's really nice to see so many here, considering the great party yesterday. I thought everybody would be hanged over and sleeping still, so I could escape from this presentation, really. But it's really nice to see so many here. So my name is Anders Haal. I work for a small Swedish, Stockholm-based consultancy company called Ingenjörsbyn. That would translate to English as the small village of IT engineers, really. So we are a small company. We work mostly in the area of architecture, design, and development of software, and also in the software development management part of the whole thing. So very much how to develop software in hopefully a good way. Especially, we are very much predominant on the service side development, so it's lots of questions around scalability, manageability, availability, of course. And in that area, surveillance and monitoring is, of course, key aspects. My presentation is called Business Activity Monitoring with Nagios, and we will dwell into what that means and try to find some examples of what we have done in this space. And yeah, continue from that. So I already covered myself and Sweden. You know Sweden. It's somewhere in Europe. It's a small part in Europe. And we don't make much chocolate. That's Switzerland. It's always confusing here in the U.S. what is what, but Sweden is in the north. So let's start with business activity monitoring and what it means. Business activity monitoring was something that was created by Gartner. And I don't know if this is the original Gartner description. This is from Wikipedia anyway. If you use the Gartner one, you probably have to pay some fees to them. And I think it came up around 2000, this sort of acronym. And what it meant was that the goals with business activity monitoring was really to create for the business operation, for the business part of the company, some means to do monitoring in real time of what is going on in their business application and their business processes. For you, monitoring, doing things in real time is so what? I mean, this is what you do every day on your IT infrastructure. But from a business operations point of view, this is not very often implemented. And the main benefits that Gartner said was you can gain by doing something like this was to be able to get informed business decision. So making decision based on something you measure instead of just guessing, which seems to be the normal way in business often. And to do this, you could also get the capability to address any problems that you would find in your business operations very quickly, instead of causing a simple problem to be a disaster later in this process. And then an extra benefit would be that if you know something about what is going on in your business process, in your applications, you can use that information to maybe reposition the organization, how you use the organization as a resources. So let's say, for example, if you are a warehouse company and you get lots of orders in for Amazon, and you know that you have lots of orders coming in today, you can maybe bring in more people. So I would guess that Amazon is good at this sort of stuff, but many companies need that sort of information to make better decisions and reposition the organization. So you could say that on all this great presentation we have had these 2 days, and especially yesterday, we talk very much about monitoring from an IT infrastructure perspective. And I mean, we started with networking monitoring, We all think it's a common place to do IT infrastructure monitoring today. You do surveillance of your databases, your web servers, everything you have. And with Nagios especially, you can do, you're really open to do monitoring on anything you want. So the next step that I see that is a potential and an opening in the market is to move into starting to do more monitoring and surveillance of what is going on in your business applications to understand what is going on in how your whole business process work. You want to take that call? Or you want to take that call? Yeah. It was your Nagios sending you an alert. So this is sort of the next space. And I don't see very much activity in this space. And Ethan talked yesterday about, and Mike, you will present it tomorrow, about understanding how our systems work from a sort of business process point of view. But for me, a bit of that is more how we look at a business, like an e-commerce site, all the system components in there, how they work as a business system, not from a process point of view always. Okay, so when you start to talk to customers about business activity monitoring, the first thing they say, what do we need that for? But then when you start to getting them to discuss what sort of things you would like to know about what's going on in your business process, in your applications, you typically get questions like this. They doesn't have anything to do with IT. They don't ask about if the routers are up or down, how much memory we have on the servers, how much disk do we have left. It's something about what they do in the business. So typically, they want to know if by some reasons, the orders into the company's business system is dropping, for example, below some thresholds. If the ratio between different entities has a certain value, if you get more orders in over the telephone or the web channel, maybe that's an interesting something that you need to understand. And how much, for example, how much errors do we have in the EDI orders that we get into the business systems? So all of this is something that really doesn't have much to do with IT, but it's information that we will find in the business process executed by the application we have in place. And from that, you can see that what it's all about is about volumes and velocity. So how much of something? It's about rates, transactions. It's about ratio. And it's about errors, of course. And this is more or less what we do in IT surveillance too, what you do all the time. You want to know if your CPU utilization is over some sort of threshold. But we'll come back to that, why this is a bit more special and what is different. Because what we have seen is, if you look at the nature of business activity monitoring, it always have something to do with time. So time is something that is important when you do business monitoring. Because, I'll make it simple. If you do surveillance of your CPU load, you typically set a fixed static value saying, if it's over 80% CPU utilization, I would like to have a warning or something like that. But if you look at the dynamic of how we get orders into the business system, it will be something that is distributed over a time period, typically a day. So you have few orders in the morning, and then it's increased in the noon, and then it decreases in the night. Or maybe if you're a web shop, it's increasing in the nighttime. So there is something always to do with time. So what is a good value, what is the threshold, is always depending on the time. So we always have time as a very important variable in this when we talk about business activity monitoring. The other thing is that we typically see that we have dependency between different sort of entities. So let's say, because we are a process, so the process starts with someone placing an order, and the process ends with someone getting an invoice. The relationship between the orders coming in is directly to how many invoices we will create. So Depending on how much orders I get into, I need to use that information when I look at how many invoices I should create, really. So we have a complex relationship between what we want to measure from our business systems. And the third thing that is also something that we have seen is in Nagios, if you define a service, it's typically something you measure. You can directly go to your source system and measure CPU load or disk utilization. But here, when it comes to the questions that you want to have an answer on from a business monitoring perspective, it's typically that you want to relate different measured entities. Because in your order system, you can measure the number of orders. And in your invoicing system, you can measure the number of invoices. You need to take these two and be able to put them in some context where you can, for example, use them together and create a ratio between the two, because that is what you want to measure. So you need some place to do some correlate and use these different values together in some good way. The question we typically get when we are out talking about business activity monitoring is, well, we have spent millions in any currency to do business intelligence. We didn't get much more intelligent, but we spent a lot of money. So I don't think we need the sort of BAM stuff you talk about. But the thing is that the business intelligence is typically used for historical data, and you do analysis of that data to understand if this shirt will sell the next month too. So it's much more a strategic planning perspective. And the people using that information is much more the business analysts in the company. But with business activity monitoring, the key thing with business activity monitoring was the real-time aspect. We want to look at what's happening now in the business. We don't want to understand it in the end of the month when we run all the business intelligence reports. So it's the real-time aspect. And the consumers of this information that we retrieve is much more the business operational people, the people who are living with the problems and the operations just right now. So it's much, much more a technical thing. A tactical thing. It's technical too, but it's much more a tactical approach to it. So these two things could absolutely be good together, but business intelligence doesn't solve the problem. So just some few findings that we have seen working with these kinds of companies. It's typically that when you go into even big companies, on the business, maybe they have an excellent infrastructure monitoring. They typically have the wrong infrastructure monitoring. They have some expensive tools, and these tools are typically owned by IT, and no one else can use them, and no one else are allowed to look at what's going on there. So the business, the monitoring tool they have is typically, the only thing I typically see is that they have emails. So they run important batches, and someone gets an email telling them everything is okay, which is the very stupid way of doing monitoring, because then you're sitting there waiting for, I didn't get a mail, so now it's broken. So they have turned it around. You want to trust your system and get notified when you have an exception from what you expected, not understanding everything was okay. And I have seen companies that do this, the most critical thing at 10 o'clock in the night, and no one in the business IT groups dare to start drinking before they get that mail. So that's the mail drinking ticket they get. And that is really horrendous, which means also that they typically don't trust very much the system they have. They don't trust them. And the problem is when they get that email, or they don't get that email 10 o'clock in the evening, it's typically because of something that happened 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's the problem they get is too late. And they just see the effects of the problem. They don't see the root cause to that problem. This is, we all working with IT monitoring, we think that's natural for us. We want to look at the root cause to everything. But in this kinds of situation, what we have seen, this is very seldom. So the thing is, too late to fix the problems become disasters instead of maybe a trivial thing to fix if they were having the information they needed. And you get in the sort of in-between also. IT typically say, this is not our problem, what's happening in the application, we don't understand anything of that. Everything is working fine, CPU utilization is very low, it's great. So you have a border between these two groups, sort of based on ideal fascism or something like that. And it's not the business intelligence problem either, because we lack in the real time. We will only understand that too late if we had a problem. The other thing is that if you go to, typically you have in Sweden anyway, the type of setup you have in a company is you have IT operation that may be internal or it's outsourced, and then you have sort of a business IT groups that should be the one who understand both business and IT. You could be the one who help them talk to each other and define the requirements business have on IT. They have a very low maturity on how to do surveillance. They don't know anything about it. I mean, you guys working more with IT operations, you have an organization, you have a process, you understand how to escalate, etc., etc. These people don't understand that sort of way of working. And the other thing is that if you look at the typically business system people have implemented, they're not developed to be able to have any monitoring on it. I don't know if anyone has a good example of a sort of home-built, internally developed system that has been built with having some sort of APIs or some sort of functionality to be very good from a monitoring perspective. I mean, everybody's focused on the functionality. So the application is not built to be monitored. And typically what you find, everything that is an SLA between the business and IT is technical to its nature. And that's not really what IT want, or what the business want, because they don't really understand what it means just an uptime of a server, for example. So the lack, to be general in this, but the lacking an implementation with a sort of an activity doing business activity monitoring, you will have typically simple problem will cause disaster. That is what we have seen everywhere. Especially one of the first customers that we started working with, they had horrendous problem if you had a glitch in the beginning of the process when they got orders in. They couldn't see that, but in the evening when all this going to be processed, then they didn't have the right information to continue the process. With horrendous cost, both in people and resources, but also in decreasing quality of service against their customers, because they also had very high sort of quality of service, what do you call it, against their customers anyway. So that cost them on that side too. And we talked about the insecurity of business teams. That's what I find. The business doesn't really know, and the business IT groups doesn't really know what's going on in my system, what is happening. They don't have anything that visualize what is going on there. Matt talked about yesterday about how important that is to visualize and see the trends. And typically what I see is that they don't have a clue what's going on, especially from the real-time perspective. So, and the final thing here is also, which I think is an interesting area that, I don't know what you say, but it would be interesting to always have a correlation between what I'm doing in my business applications when I'm processing orders, how that correlates to the IT resources I use to do that job. Because if I could correlate that, I can understand sort of what an amount of orders or fixing errors in order is really costing in resource utilization. And that, again, what Matt talked about, correlate these different graphs together and see how they affect, to be able to do better forecasting and trending on the resources we need in the operation. So let's take a simple example, which is a shipping and forwarding example. This would typically be like FedEx or DHL or something like that. It's for them a sort of basic business process they have. In the middle, you have a number of different applications. Typically, you have something that is managing shipments and the shipment process. You have typically geographical coding system that calculates depending on where you're going to send this shipment with all its pieces. It calculates how it should be really loaded on the trucks so it can be taken out of the trucks in the correct way when you drive down your route of delivery. So that's a key thing for efficiency. And then you have invoicing system, and you probably have lots of other systems too. And the whole process starts with a shipment order is sent from a customer saying, I want to take this number of pieces and send it to someone who receives it. And then you go out and you pick up the pieces that is related to the shipment, and the pieces and the shipments are sent through different steps, typically being picked up, going to terminal, its weight and volume machines are checking these pieces, and in the end it's being delivered to a customer. And the whole process down in the business application is driven really by the different events coming in. So it's changing the life cycle, the state of the shipment moving forward. And this was a real example, really, that you wanted to understand what was going on from this end the whole way over to this end, really. Well, the first thing you need to do in the same way when you do IT operations, you need to retrieve some information from this business system. You need to connect to them. The biggest problem for business systems, they are typically developed internally or by some consultancy company that said it was a product, but it wasn't a product. So there's no standards, there's no models for really how the application is constituted. So typically the way to connect to this type of business system is database connections. Maybe they have some files you can read, or reading files, input files, output files. Maybe they have some web services. Emails is typically a way the system communicates with outside world. So you need to find different connectivity types. And you have to be important, of course, when you connect to it, especially database, everybody gets scared. If you connect to my database, you will bring it down or something like that. Because they can't maybe monitoring it correctly from IT, I don't know. But you need to be sort of lightweight intrusive in the system. And of course that is always when you do measuring things, you don't want to measure on something and your measurement methods change the system's characteristics. So, and this is the same in IT monitoring. We need to connect and retrieve data in some way. The other thing that we talked about initially, which is important then when it comes to business application, is that we have a behavior that is like a graph over a day period. And it's difficult for you to see, but the blue line here is shipments over the day. So this is how this system that we had in the example is receiving shipment orders. So it starts at 10 and it goes up to in midnight and goes up to like 50,000 or something like that. So that's the curve, that's the profile over the day. So what is a good value at 10 or 12 that we could expect is not the same value that we could expect later in the afternoon. So we need to have a way to change the threshold for that metric of shipments. And the other thing is that this is a day different for different days. Mondays and Fridays are lower than Tuesdays to Thursdays. The first day in the month, if it's a Monday, it's a busy day, or stuff like that. Invoicing is done every 2 weeks on Fridays. So we have profiles that are, first we have a profile over the day, but then we have different profiles for different days. So we need to manage that in some way. And we also have calendars, holidays, days like we have exceptions. We don't do anything on these days. And here we also can see that we have the process relation between the different measured values. Shipment is typically, number of invoices we do is a function of how many shipments we got. But maybe not the same day. Maybe this is the curve 10 days later from the shipments we got in. So we have the latency in the process. And the other thing we talked about before, we need to be able to create what we call composite metrics or virtual metrics. Virtual is probably more cool these days to say that you have something that is virtual. But this is typically, you can measure shipments in one system, invoices in one system, but you need to create a new service that is the invoice rate. And you can't find that as a measuring directly in any of the systems. So you need a place to create that yourself. So that's a bit of the sort of aspects of metrics you want to measure. So the key thing, really, the whole presentation comes down to this slide. So the most important thing of the presentation is just one slide. That's strange. And that's about, I hope you had guessed that at this time, that it's the threshold management that is the key thing. So remember the picture we had on the slide before about shipments? So it's changing over the day. So now we need to have defined thresholds in a way to meet that profile what we expect from the day profile. So what we came up with as a basic model, that what we did was we created a profile that we broke down in 24-hour intervals. And for each interval, for each hour in that day profile, you could define a value. So you could say, I'm expecting at 12 o'clock, I'm expecting at least 10,000 shipments. And 1 o'clock, 20,000. And in between there, we just did a linear equation and said that, well, around 12:30, we're expecting 15,000 shipments. You could probably come up with some other mathematical model or model that you want to implement. And we said, yeah, that is exactly what you would like to do, implement your own threshold models. But this was our basic first step with it. But for shipments, the example of shipments, it's okay for me to define a fixed value for each hour. But like we said, we're doing all this geographical and coding of the shipments coming in. And since that is related to how many shipments I have, it's not good enough to just set a fixed value for 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. So I need to have the possibilities to express that in some mathematical terms. So in this example here, we could say that, okay, it's 80% of the shipments, which is my threshold for how many shipments that I have geographical coded. And then I get the dynamic. If the shipments rates change, that will automatically change how many my threshold for how much I can expect to have geographically coded. But it will still be 80% or whatever it was. But it wasn't enough. That could be good enough. But we have a latency in this process. You know, a process takes time, even if people want this to be really fast, especially if you order a new computer or something like that. But you have a latency. So in the last example here, you can define the threshold for the geographical coding to be 80% of the shipments, but what the shipment value was 30 minutes ago or 24 hours ago, whatever you need. So you can work with the latency in this whole process. So then you get some sort of dynamic over time how to manage this. And of course, what we talked about before, you need to be able to do these day profiles. You can have different day profiles with this content for different days in the month, or different days in the week, or whatever. When we had understood well, we didn't understand all of this from the beginning, but we understood that we needed something that was in this area. And when we looked around since we have used Nagios before, we looked around in Nagios market in the community, seeing if anyone was doing anything like this, some sort of threshold, dynamic, or whatever. We couldn't really find anything. So if you are a developer, you have to develop it yourself, of course. But first, before that, we can say this is an example how this would look in Nagios. I know it's a small, do you see anything or a little bit? This is the service EDI shipments. How many shipments we get into the system in electronic way? Well, FTP. FTP is what business use. So you can see currently that the number of shipments we have is, the state is okay. We have 75,194. The threshold is currently at this time 55,000. And then you can see the warning level and the criteria level, which is a percentage of the threshold. And in this example, everything should be over the threshold. But we need also to be able to configure something that could be under a threshold, which would typically be errors. We like them to be under something. And we would typically also want, in some cases, be able to define that the measured value should be in the interval around that threshold. So it should not be too high and not too low. It should be close to the threshold. And here you can see the graphing. We do graphing. Isn't it good, Matt? Yeah, thanks. And you can see here that the yellow is the measured value, and the brown, I think it's brown. You can see we are not very good on the GUI side, so the colors are not very good. But the brown is the threshold. So we're plotting from a performance point of view both what we measure and what the threshold is. And you can see that the thresholds are different. On the Monday, there are 26. The threshold is lower than on the 27, 28, because that is what the business expects. So you get some sort of dynamic here in the threshold management. I mean, in this presentation, I talked about business things, orders, shipments, and that sort of thing. But really, I can imagine that there is lots of places where you would like to have this sort of dynamic threshold management, depending on something, and not just make it static on your command line when you send it into your HTTP check, because you want to have it depending on something else. So anyway, we didn't find anything that we could use, so we developed something on our own, of course. And first of all, we knew that we wanted to have Nagios because Nagios have all the great stuff with being the engine of managing any events and checks, etc. I know how to escalate, etc. The graphing. So we said we just need to have something that is between the systems and Nagios to manage this threshold thing. So we came up with something called BizCheck. And it's a sort of a plug-in server. I don't know what it should be called in the Nagios community. But it's a standalone server, that daemon, that can run on the same machine or some other machine, and really communicates with Nagios over NCSA with passive checks. Excuse me. So the configuration is okay, 10 minutes. The configuration is really that you define host services, and for each service you define the type of connections you're going to have. If it's a JDBC to a database or reading a SMT or POP server or something like that. So you have connection classes that you can use for a service, and you can also say that for this service that is retrieving shipment information, it should be scheduled every 5 minutes or only 1 o'clock in the night. So you have a possibility to do scheduling like cron. And it's a multi-threaded scheduling, so everything can execute in the same time. So when you have retrieved the value based on your connection, on your scheduling, what the value you retrieved, you send it off to threshold class that is configured for this specific service. And that threshold class, typically the one that we have built which is this 24-hour-day profile. Execute that data and say sends back if this is okay, warning level, or critical. You can implement whatever threshold class you want. It's just a Java interface that you can do and deploy whatever class you want to do your own threshold mechanism, depending on how much sun is shining or something like that. In the current version we're doing now, and also there is a cache because, as I said from before, we need to be able to retrieve in the threshold. When I execute my threshold, I use shipments when I do the geographical coding. So I need to be able to retrieve what all the values I have from the shipments prior. And especially if I want to add a latency, I need to go back and be able to look at how shipments looked 30 minutes ago or 2 days ago or something like that. Currently, this is a non-persistent cache, so it's quick and easy. And you could implement different types of caching mechanisms if you want. Anyway, we also saw that one of the things that in the first version, we just sent it off to Nagios. What we did was we saw this information could be used anywhere, or maybe other systems like Open HPView, but we could never figure out how to integrate with that anyway, so that will never happen. But one thing that we saw was a project called OpenTSDB, which has a really great graphing engine for doing trending and kicking up many, many graphs in the same screen so you can see correlation and relations and that sort of thing. I'll show you a picture of that. So in the trunk now, you have the server integration component, so you can write your own integration to whatever server you want to send the data to. Some of the features I talked about it, so we will skip that. It's GPL2 licensed. It's written in Java. It can probably run on everything that can run Java, but it installs nicely and correctly on RHEL 5 and CentOS 5, that type of distribution. If someone wants to do something for Windows, it would be great, for example, an installation. Okay, so this is just an example of what I call an alternative dashboard. This is an example from OpenTSDB. And in this screen, we have plotted shipments. The number of arrows on shipments is the red one, and some sort of CPU utilization. So you can get the correlation. Okay, interesting. High CPU utilization when we have high number of arrows. And, yeah, whatever analysis you can make from it. But I think it's a good way to start to communicate between IT and business also, because you get some sort of common visualization of what is going on. So, very quickly, the benefits we have seen here is that, first of all, using Nagios, I don't need to say it. It's a great tool. It's open. You can do whatever you want. And for us to implement something like this, we could just focus on what we missed. And we didn't need to do anything else because everything else is already there. And today, we have one of the companies that's been sponsoring the project, DHL. They're using this in production since January. And they're using Nagios and the OP5 interface, Ninja. And even getting business people to look at sort of the graphs and what's going on the screen. So it's really great. So I think proactive against reactive, that's something you can sell. And in the end, they will understand it because it will cost them too much. And the investment of, especially for you, if you have Nagios already, this is a low-cost investment to start using this kind of thing. So getting business out of the IT blindness, they start to see something, what is happening in the system with the visualization and graphing. They start to see patterns. Even if you don't have thresholds of everything, they start to see and can understand what is going on. What is happening on Tuesday afternoons, really? Why is that different from Wednesdays or whatever? But they start to get the numbers up there in real time. They start to be able to do something, have a discussion around it. So I think we have seen also that there's lots of creativity, what more you want to do here now. The hinder is often to get into the IT system because IT is stopping. So don't touch my systems. Okay, so So to get things going the way we did anyway, or we were lucky to do it. We find an itch. We were working in for DHL in a totally different project, and we found an itch there, the problem they had. We could start small, be very tactical, going under the radar, installing something that no one knew, and then finding the sponsorship in the business operations, and they could see the value of this. So in the end, when you wanted to go into production, there was no discussion about tools, Nagios is the right thing, or anything like that, because it was already there, and it worked, and they used it. So especially for anyone that already have Nagios, which I expect everybody of you have, starting to use this, especially in a dialogue with business, you can maybe get some more value from what you have with your investment in surveillance, and really helping business understand more. So before I say thank you for listening, you can this check, as I said, is open source. You can get it from our web site. It's and download it. There is some versions there that are stable. You can download it. You can check out the trunk also if you want to. So it's a version repository. And if you use it, or if you in the space of business activity monitoring and try to do stuff, I would be really good to hear your experience and what your customers saying, or your sort of internal customers saying, and what they want like to do. And I think that if you take anything from this presentation, think about this sort of threshold part and what it would mean for you, because that, I think, is the key thing. Really. So thank you for listening. Yeah, sure. I hope someone has a question. Otherwise,
anybody has any?
Okay. Sure. Yeah. 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 I'll try to repeat your question, but what you're saying is that who should know about the KPI? Who is responsible for defining it? So yeah, I think it's a good question, because that was really also the challenge we had, trying to define the thresholds and what they expect, and it was surprising how little they know. One approach that we had was that we said, okay, forget about let's start measuring, and let's start to see the information we get there. And we start to see how it looks from different weeks and then you started to get real values that you can define your thresholds, or what you expect. Yeah. Yeah. For some entities, they knew more, but for some, they didn't know anything, because it was like in blindness for them. So I think you need to be very pragmatic. Don't start with a big sort of defining all the requirements, but start measuring, because that's the problem they have. They don't have any measurements. So how can they define something they don't have? So they need to start measuring. And I think that's the whole thing you need to try to get into the heads of these people, is measuring and having the data is what makes the difference. The one who has most data wins in some way, because you don't know what's going on otherwise. So I think very tactical approach to it. Start small. One question, not two. Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned briefly your slides had geocode on it.
Yeah.
Have you guys done anything in terms of like location-specific thresholds, or if you guys looked into statistics instead of just like seasonality?
Could you give me an example of how you mean?
Like, for example, you showed the 24-hour.
Yeah.
Have you guys done anything with, like, holidays? Like, there's going to be a lot more shipments around December.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing. Maybe I wasn't clear there. But what you can do, you can define different profiles for any day of the year. You can define it for a granularity down on that specific day. Or you can say, I have a profile for the Monday in every week. And you can have calendars. You have a calendar too. So you can say that in BizCheck, the service definition includes 1 to, I don't know how many day profile you can have for that. So you can achieve exactly that. And that is what they are using. Especially over a week, is typically it's different. Yes? Yeah. That was, did everybody hear the question? How we did the volumes versus the rates? Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question because we couldn't capture the rate. We could only capture in the source system, in the shipment system, we could only capture the how many it was currently. And that was the reason, and that was one of the driving mechanisms that we need to have a cache. So we're collecting every 5 minutes how many shipments is it now. So in this BizCheck server, we can calculate the rate.
What's the base accounting system that you're using?
The hooks into.
What's your basic accounting system for shipping your invoices? In other words, someone's generating invoices, someone's generating packing lists and invoices, or shipments.
Yeah.
What is that base system that you're using there?
Well, one of the shipment system is ACE 400 DB2. You wouldn't know. There's not a. It's a for that customer developed application, for example. In the other case, for invoicing, it's Oracle Financials. The cache is, we keep it. We keep track of all the things. Here you have something that is against the database. But we are limited to what we could, what our
So from the real-time aspect, from noon to 1 o'clock, the launcher stops generating invoices. It doesn't mean you have a problem.
No, that's right. So, but that's what we monitor.
Oh, I agree.
So,
Let's thank Anders for a great presentation.
thank you.